Devin Nunes is a patriot, and I'm glad you went through Trey Gowdy's exquisite questions in 2017 to these corrupt officials.
Did anyone that you interviewed, and I was looking for your interrogation, you did a great job behind the scenes. A lot of people did a great job behind the scenes. At any point, did anybody, in any way, shape, manner, or form, ever confirm anything in the dirty dossier that Hillary paid for that Christopher Steele's subsource in February 2017 said was wrong, but still was used in a scope memo by Rod Rosenstein in August of 2017, like 8 months later, and still used as a basis for the FISA warrants, the 2 remaining renewal warrants? Did anyone ever give you any justification to believe there was any truth in that dirty dossier that Hillary paid for, sir?
Glenn Simpson couldn't even do it, and he's a Fusion GPS owner. Michael Cohen, who hates the president, he said the dossier is just a bunch of lies. I mean, this is somebody who hates Trump, and he said it's a bunch of lies. Glenn Simpson bought and paid for it, and he couldn't verify it.
I guess my question, Sean, would be, why was it then in late May of 2018 that Trey Gowdy went on Martha McCallum's show and said that the FBI did exactly what all of our fellow Americans would have wanted them to do, and that it had nothing to do with Donald Trump?
So how do you like the fact they had people infiltrating our campaign? Can you imagine? Can you imagine?
The president repeated his claim in Nashville last night. He said last week that the use of an informant could be, quote, one of the biggest political scandals in U.S. history. Republican Congressman Trey Gowdy of South Carolina is chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. He attended a classified Justice Department briefing last week in response to the president's allegation. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm well. You have looked at the actual evidence here in this briefing. The president has not. You said, having looked at this, you said, I am even more convinced that the FBI did exactly what Americans would want them to do when they got the information they did. Why did you say that? How can you be so sure?
Well, when the FBI comes into contact with information about what a foreign government may be doing in our election cycle, I think they have an obligation to run it out. I think the FBI, if they were at the table this morning, they would tell you Russia was the target and Russia's intentions toward our country were the target. The fact that 2 people who were loosely connected with the Trump campaign may have been involved doesn't diminish the fact that Russia was the target and not the campaign.
So you looked at this and you said what the FBI was doing was kosher. Why does the president keep saying what he's saying when he knows better?
I don't know. I've never met or talked to the president. I cannot tell you.
You've never met or talked to President Trump?
I have not.
But what he is saying, just to be clear, about this being somehow out of bounds, based on your experience and the evidence you saw, that's not the case.
Well, think back to what the president himself told James Comey. He said, I didn't collude with Russia, but if anyone connected with my campaign did, I want you to investigate it. It strikes me that that's exactly what the FBI was doing.
Let me ask you some specific questions. Was there a spy?
That is not a term I've ever used in the criminal justice system. Undercover, informant, confidential informant, those are all words I'm familiar with. I've never heard the term spy used.
So when the president says Spygate, that's not there was no spy inserted into the campaign. Have you seen any evidence of that?
I have not. That's an espionage term. That's not a law enforcement term.
You believe the FBI acted properly in this matter?
Based on what I have seen, I don't know what the FBI could have done or should have done other than run out a lead that someone loosely connected with the campaign was making assertions about Russia. I would think you would want the FBI to find out whether or not there was any validity to what those people were saying.
Our friend, the great one, Mark Levin, just literally lighting up House Oversight Committee Chairman Trey Gowdy after the congressman praised the FBI for spying on the Trump campaign. Congressman Gowdy, what's happened to you? Take a listen.
And he's drawn a conclusion. There's nothing wrong with this FBI informant. The FBI did exactly what the FBI is supposed to do, and the American people agree. And, of course, Trey Gowdy knows that the American people agree because nobody speaks for the American people like Trey Gowdy. Did they have an informant, a.k.a. a spy, at the DNC to chase down the Russians who were hacking the DNC's emails? No. If they're trying to protect us and the candidates in the election from the Russians, as we pointed out last week, why weren't there informants in Jill Stein's campaign or Hillary Clinton's campaign or Bernie Sanders' campaign?
We're going to start the show tonight by showing you a video the mainstream media does not want you to see. It's absolutely astounding. In the wake of the revelations by Inspector General Horowitz in his report and in his testimony to the Senate Judiciary Committee, there is no way for the Democrats to deny monstrous FBI malfeasance. So what does the mainstream media do? The media simply refuse to focus on this footage that I'm about to show you, this exchange between Senator Lindsey Graham and Inspector General Horowitz from the Senate hearings yesterday. The mainstream media hopes that you won't see this. Since the mainstream media won't cover this, we will. Now, before I play this, there are two critical points to watch for. First of all, Inspector General Horowitz in this video admits that the FBI spied on the Trump campaign. Horowitz won't use that word, spying, but what else is it when the FBI surreptitiously sends an FBI agent to report on the members of the Trump campaign under the guise of briefing them on something else? Take a look at this.
This was opened up as a counterintelligence investigation, right?
Correct.
And we know the Russians were screwing around with the Democrats, right? That's one of the concerns. Correct. It was the Russians who acted in the DNC.
Correct.
Got their emails.
Correct.
So it's okay for everybody to be concerned. What are the Russians up to? I get that. It's okay to look at what's the standard to start one of these things?
There are two types of investigations. Both of them have relatively low thresholds, as we point out here, for predication.
Okay. So let's assume for a moment that relatively low threshold was met. Would it be fair to say that if you stop there and looking at your report, you're making a mistake?
You would be making a mistake. There is 400 pages here for a reason.
There's a mountain of misconduct. Please don't ignore it.
This is critically important for two reasons. The first being Senator Graham's point that if Democrats are only reading that one line of the Inspector General report and saying, well, there was adequate predication to open the investigation, but then ignoring everything else, then the Democrats and the mainstream media are being woefully biased. Second, and this is a point Graham did not make, but it's equally important, even if the legal standard to open a counterintelligence investigation was met initially, and it's a low standard to open that kind of probe, that does not mean that the standards to surveil a private citizen was adequately met. And if the FBI continued to surveil a private citizen, even when exculpatory evidence was uncovered in the course of this investigation, the fact that the original threshold was met to open the investigation to begin with has zero bearing on the legality of the continuing surveillance, especially if it was illegal. And here's where Horowitz admits that the FBI secretly surveilled the Trump campaign. Listen.
My point is, if this is a counterintelligence investigation, who are they trying to protect? Who should they be trying to protect?
Well, if it's the threat outlined in the friendly foreign government information, you would be looking to protect the election process,
right?
Which would include
the candidate,
the campaign, the candidate, and the American people.
Okay, so did they ever brief Hillary Clinton about efforts to foreign influences involving her campaign? Do you know?
I've heard that, but I don't know for a fact.
They did. Good for them. And they stopped it. Was there ever a defensive briefing given by the FBI, Department of Justice, to Donald Trump about the concerns?
There was not.
What would you call a counterintelligence investigation that never had a protective element?
I'm not sure. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, if without eventually trying to protect the entity being influenced, is it legitimate?
It would depend on each fact and circumstance.
Here's what I'm trying to tell you.
Yeah.
If you're opening up a counterintelligence investigation to protect somebody, you should do it. Did they ever try to protect Donald Trump from foreign influence?
They did not brief him, and we lay out on page 55.
As a matter of fact, when they went in and gave a vanilla briefing, the Russians are out there, you better beware. Didn't they have an FBI agent do a 302 on the defensive briefing itself?
They sent one of the supervisory agents from the Crossfire Hurricane team to the briefing, and that agent prepared a report to the file of the briefing.
About what Trump said.
About what Mr. Trump said and what Mr. Flynn said.
You heard it yourself. Don't let the Democrats tell you the Trump campaign wasn't spied on. This is proof of it from Horowitz himself. And then the next part of this video, this shows you the second major takeaway that I was talking about before. This part proves that the FBI lied to Congress. Watch the video first.
To those who can set aside how I feel about Trump for a minute, under the guise of protecting the campaign from Russian influence, they never lift a finger to protect the campaign. Every time they had information that the people they suspected were working for the Russians, it went the other way, and they kept going. When they did generically brief candidate Trump, they sent an FBI agent in to do a 302. If this doesn't bother you, you hate Trump way too much. Was that FBI agent spying on Donald Trump when he went in there?
It was a pretext meeting that I'm not going to. The process by which they have to do these meetings.
If you don't have a foundation for a warrant and you continue, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Do you need to say anything else?
I'm sorry.
There's no. Okay.
The incident, the event, the meeting was a briefing, and the FBI considered and decided to send that agent there to do the briefing. So the agent was actually doing the briefing, but also using it for the purpose of investigation.
Okay, now I hope that doesn't happen to us tomorrow. I'll be really pissed if it does.
There. Right there, that proves the FBI lied to Congress. In 2017, Senator Chuck Grassley wrote a letter to the FBI asking if the FBI ever provided President Trump and his campaign with a defensive briefing about Russian meddling in the election, particularly if the FBI had any concerns about meddling with the Trump campaign directly. The FBI then wrote a letter back to Grassley saying, yes, the FBI briefed the Trump campaign. Well, it turns out, as you heard from Inspector General Horowitz himself, that was willful misdirection from the FBI. The FBI did not brief the Trump campaign on counterintelligence concerns regarding their campaign specifically. Just vague warnings that Russia's out there and Russia isn't a friend. And in that vague briefing, the FBI sent an agent to surveil members of the Trump campaign itself, including then-candidate Donald Trump. Breathtaking, isn't it? No wonder the Democrats, no wonder the mainstream media doesn't want you to focus on that video.
The number one question I get asked from Americans is why no one has gone to jail and been held accountable. Unfortunately, when Nunes and Meadows and Jordan and I wanted subpoena power, it was Paul Ryan and Trey Gowdy that wouldn't give us that subpoena power. Democrats sent out hundreds of subpoenas when we had control and could have run this to ground in 2017. We didn't send out a single subpoena, not one, and that's a failure of our Republican leadership.
Right before the recess, you sat in a briefing with Trey Gowdy, who came out afterwards and said that he's more convinced the FBI did exactly what my fellow citizens would want them to do. Do you agree with Trey Gowdy?
Yeah, normally I don't like to comment on classified briefings. Let me say it this way. I think Chairman Gowdy's initial assessment is accurate. I think, but we have some more digging to do. We're waiting for some more document requests. We have some more documents to review. We still have someone answer questions. It would have been helpful if we got this information earlier. As Chairman Nunes said just the other day, if we got all the information we were looking for, we could wrap this up faster. But I have seen no evidence to the contrary of the initial assessment that Chairman Gowdy has made. But I want to make sure that we run every lead down and make sure we get final answers to these questions.
So Paul Ryan was not a talent. He wasn't a leader. When the people in freedom and great congressmen wanted to go after the Dems for things that they did very badly, he wouldn't give subpoenas, whereas Nancy Pelosi hands them out like they're cookies.
You are leaving Washington, in part, you've suggested, because there's a frustration with the way things work here. What's the fundamental flaw?
Human nature. When I mention human nature, I would like to see us apply the same rules to our friends as we do to our enemies. If we were really curious about this administration doing something, we should be equally curious when our own administration does it.
Let me ask you, Congressman, why in the world would your conference not say that's enough? Mr. Lame Duck Speaker, get the hell out of the office. You're going to send us to perdition and to destruction in the midterm elections. This man doesn't have a plan. He doesn't have a strategy. He doesn't raise money that any other speaker couldn't raise. He certainly is not a strategic thinker. He is anti-Trump. He has been so throughout. He is a disaster, and the disaster is going to consume your party. Do you not agree? If he is left in that speakership.
Well, Lou, you know I run in the more conservative circles of the House, and I have never, up until this point, heard a single person talk about removing Speaker Ryan from the speakership. Today, for the first time, I was hearing colleagues say, well, you know, if Speaker Ryan won't stand with us in this fight over the essentials of our democracy, not weaponizing an intelligence community against a presidential campaign, you know, do we need to look at other choices? And so I think that remains a lingering question, and you're starting to see more frustrations bubble to the top because we need that leadership.
So you were right when we met 8 years ago. We are peers. We are colleagues. We became friends. But Paul, you are wrong about one thing. We are not equals. You don't have an equal. People like you don't come along very often. And when they do, they don't come with your humility. When our founding fathers decided to engage in this experiment, this intersection of virtue, knowledge, and freedom, it was people like you that they had in mind. And if I had one draft choice, if we were starting this experiment to lasso human nature through government, if I had one pick, as a modern-day founding father or mother, it would be you, Paul. Of all the people I know in politics, it would be you. So you leave as you began, my favorite member of Congress.